The morning sun cast a golden sheen across the vast training grounds of the naval base, burning away the last traces of mist that had lingered over the field. It was a clear day, the kind that carried with it a heavy silence before the sound of gunfire shattered it. Admiral Thomas Hayes stood at the edge of the range with his hands clasped firmly behind his back, his sharp gaze scanning the lineup of recruits preparing for weapons qualification. Years of service had etched deep lines in his weathered face, but his eyes remained as sharp as the steel targets glinting in the distance. To the Admiral, these qualification tests were more than routine exercises. They were moments of revelation opportunities to see which individuals possessed not only the technical skill, but also the nerve to perform under pressure. It was one thing to handle a weapon on the practice range, quite another to execute with precision when the stakes demanded it. Among the recruits stood Lieutenant Clara Rhodes, a figure who seemed unremarkable at first glance. She was neither the tallest nor the most imposing in the lineup. Her frame, lean rather than bulky, contrasted sharply with some of the other officers, many of whom had built their reputations on sheer physicality. Yet there was something in her posture that set her apart. She stood at ease without appearing careless, her shoulders relaxed but ready, her gaze steady as she looked out over the firing lanes. Hayes had heard the whispers about her long before this day arrived. Stories circulated in mess halls and training barracks dailies of her uncanny ability to hit targets at distances where others struggled just to see the mark. The Admiral, a man not prone to believing rumors, had dismissed most of them as exaggerations, the kind of myth-making that often attached itself to promising recruits. But there was one report in particular that had caught his attention. During a joint exercise, Clara had allegedly taken down 3 moving targets in less than 15 seconds with near-perfect accuracy. The Admiral intended to discover today whether such claims had any truth. The .50 caliber rifle awaited her at the front of the line. The weapon itself was a formidable sight massive, gleaming under the sun, its long barrel resting heavily on its stand. Designed to deliver devastating force over long distances, it was not a weapon for the faint of heart. Even seasoned marksmen often struggled with its punishing recoil, and more than one recruit had left the range with a bruised shoulder and shaken confidence. Clara approached the weapon with quiet composure. Unlike the others, who shifted nervously or cracked uneasy jokes to mask their tension, she moved with a steady calm, as though the weight of the moment rested easily on her shoulders. She paused briefly before the rifle, her fingers brushing along the cold steel, as if reacquainting herself with an old companion. Admiral Hayes narrowed his eyes. He had seen countless men and women falter at this stage, their nerves betraying them before they even touched the trigger. Yet there was no tremor in Clara's hands, no hesitation in her movements. She bent down and adjusted her stance, sliding into position behind the rifle with practiced ease. Her cheek rested lightly against the stock, her eye aligning with the scope. Around her, the recruits exchanged doubtful glances. Many of them had dismissed Clara before the test even began. Some questioned whether she had the strength to handle the weapon. Others assumed her quiet demeanor masked inexperience. The Admiral caught snippets of muttered comments but ignored them. He preferred to let performance silence skepticism. As Clara settled into position, the range seemed to fall into a deeper hush. The only sound was the faint rattle of flags snapping in the breeze and the distant call of gulls overhead. The steel targets, lined up at varying distances, glistened in the sunlight like unyielding sentinels waiting to be tested. Hayes studied Clara closely. He looked for the subtle giveaways, shallow breathing, restless fingers, darting eyes that betrayed doubt. Instead, he found an unshakable steadiness. Her breathing slowed, controlled, each inhale and exhale deliberate. Her hands, though slender, gripped the rifle with confidence, adjusting the angle with minor, precise movements. The Admiral's memory drifted to his own first encounter with the .50 cal decades earlier. He remembered the way the weapon had rattled his bones, the way the recoil had jolted through his entire body, leaving his shoulder aching for days. It had taken him weeks to develop the kind of control Clara displayed effortlessly now. That thought unsettled him. The officer beside him, Commander Reese, leaned in slightly. "That's the Rhodes girl," Reese murmured. "They say she's the one who outshot the Marines during the joint exercise last spring." Hayes didn't respond immediately. His eyes never left Clara. "Rumors mean nothing here," he finally said. "The range tells the truth." Down on the firing line, Clara made her final adjustments. Her finger hovered just above the trigger guard. She inhaled deeply, filling her lungs, then released the breath in a slow, measured stream. It was a ritual, one that steadied her mind as much as her body. For Clara, this moment was not about proving herself to the Admiral or the recruits watching. It was about discipline applying everything she had trained for, everything she had drilled into muscle memory. The rifle was not an obstacle to her. It was a partner in execution. She believed that mastery was not about overpowering the weapon, but about aligning herself with it, letting precision dictate the outcome. The world seemed to narrow for her until only the target remained, framed perfectly in her scope. She tuned out the weight of the stairs behind her, the whispers of doubt, even the faint rustle of wind across the field. There was only her, the rifle, and the steel plate in the distance. Admiral Hayes leaned forward slightly, his hands tightening behind his back. He had witnessed many shooters over the years, some reckless, some brilliant, some collapsing under the pressure of expectation. He felt a stirring of anticipation he hadn't experienced in a long time. Then Clara's finger began its slow, steady pull on the trigger. The crack of the .50 cal shattered the silence, reverberating across the training grounds with a force that seemed to shake the very air. A plume of smoke curled upward from the barrel, and the echo of the shot rolled across the open field. Every head snapped toward the target line, eyes straining to see the result. The steel plate wavered for a fraction of a second before toppling to the ground with a resounding clang. For an instant, the range remained utterly silent. Then a ripple of murmurs swept through the recruits, disbelief and awe mingling in their voices. Clara remained unmoved, already shifting her focus toward the next target, her breathing steady, her composure intact. Admiral Hayes said nothing, but a flicker of something rare crossed his stern face. Not surprise, he had expected competence, but recognition. He was watching not just another recruit, but someone whose skill might soon eclipse even the legends he had known. The test had only begun, yet the Admiral already knew this day would be remembered. The acrid scent of gunpowder still lingered in the air from Clara's first shot, drifting lazily across the training field like smoke from a distant fire. The steel target that had toppled moments before lay silent on the ground, its fall still etched into the minds of every recruit watching. For them, it was the first crack in their assumptions, the first hint that Lieutenant Clara Rhodes was not simply another face in the lineup. But for Clara, the moment was already gone. She shifted her body slightly, realigning her shoulders, adjusting her elbows against the coarse gravel beneath her. The .50 caliber rifle, with its imposing weight and brutal recoil, no longer seemed like an obstacle. It rested against her, as naturally as if it had been built for her hands alone. Admiral Hayes did not move. He had not blinked since the thunderous blast rang out. The weapon's roar had rippled through his chest, awakening memories of battles long past, of nights when the sound of heavy fire had meant survival or loss. But this was no battlefield. This was a proving ground, and the young woman in front of him was about to prove much more than her ability to hit a target. Clara exhaled slowly, letting the tension ease from her chest as she lined up her next shot. The second target stood slightly farther away, its metallic surface gleaming under the bright morning sun. Through the scope, the world narrowed again. She saw nothing but the steel plate, framed neatly in the circle of glass. The rest of the field, the crowd behind her, even the Admiral's watchful presence, dissolved into nothingness. Her right hand rested lightly against the rifle's grip, fingers poised but patient. Her left hand steadied the forend, muscles taut yet controlled. The recoil from the first shot should have left her shoulder tender, her arms trembling. Instead, her posture remained unchanged, her breathing steady, her composure flawless. A hush swept over the recruits. Doubt had turned to fascination. They leaned forward almost unconsciously, eyes fixed on Clara, as though compelled to witness whatever came next. Some of them had struggled to manage this weapon even once, their shots scattering wide or missing entirely. Watching Clara settle back into position with such effortless calm was like watching a pianist sit before her instrument, preparing to play a piece no one else could. Admiral Hayes, though outwardly stoic, felt his jaw tighten. He was searching for flaws, an overcorrection in her aim, a twitch in her stance, a flicker of hesitation in her movements. Yet none revealed themselves. She was locked in, every motion deliberate, every adjustment precise. He wondered briefly whether she even registered the magnitude of what she was doing. Clara's finger tightened on the trigger once more. The blast ripped across the range, thunder rolling from the barrel of the rifle. Dust kicked up in small clouds around her, and the echo of the shot chased itself across the field before fading into silence. All eyes snapped to the second target. It didn't sway or stagger. It dropped instantly, folding under the impact as though it had been waiting for her to strike. A collective murmur swept the recruits, louder this time, less disbelief than awe. Several exchanged wide-eyed glances, silently acknowledging what none of them had expected to see. Commander Reese gave a low whistle, shaking his head. 2 for 2, he muttered under his breath. That's no accident. Hayes didn't respond. His gaze remained locked on Clara. She didn't celebrate or even pause to acknowledge the murmurs behind her. Instead, she adjusted again, realigning the rifle with practiced precision. Her breathing slowed further, her eyes never leaving the scope. To Clara, each target was not just a challenge, but a conversation, a test of her control, her focus, her refusal to be rattled. Every round carried the weight of expectation, yet she carried it lightly, almost effortlessly. Her training had drilled into her the importance of rhythm, of composure under pressure. To shoot well, she believed, was to let the world fall away until only the essentials remained: the weapon, the target, and the will to connect them. The third target was positioned at a different angle, partially obscured by the glare of the rising sun. It was meant to test adaptability, to force the shooter to contend with conditions beyond simple distance. Clara adjusted her body minutely, lowering her cheek against the stock, tilting her head until the sun's glare shifted out of her view. Her breathing slowed further, as though she could command even the air around her obey. The recruits watched in silence now, their skepticism replaced by anticipation. Every small movement Clara made seemed amplified, every adjustment laden with meaning. Even the smallest shuffle of her elbow seemed calculated, precise. Hayes leaned slightly toward Commander Reese. "Do you see it?" he asked quietly. Reese frowned. "See what, sir?" "The discipline," Hayes replied. "She doesn't just shoot. She calculates. She adapts." Before Reese could respond, Clara fired again. The rifle roared, its recoil thundering back into her shoulder. The third target, struck dead center, clanged violently before collapsing into the dirt with finality. This time, the crowd couldn't restrain themselves. A wave of low exclamations rolled through the recruits, some shaking their heads in disbelief, others whispering rapidly, as though they had just witnessed something impossible. Clara, Unfazed, simply recentered herself, preparing for the next challenge. Admiral Hayes felt a stirring of something rare. He had seen countless soldiers pass through these ranges, some brilliant, others disastrous. But what set Clara apart was not just her accuracy. It was the way she carried herself, the unshakable calm under scrutiny, a precision that seemed to rise from somewhere deeper than training. She wasn't performing for approval, nor was she chasing glory. She was executing with an inner certainty that required no validation. 3 down, Reese muttered, almost to himself. Sir, at this rate, Hayes interrupted. She's about to change the way every one of them looks at this rifle. On the firing line, Clara adjusted again, already preparing for the 4th target. The recruits, who only minutes ago had doubted her entirely, now found themselves holding their breath with each pull of the trigger. For them, she was no longer simply another officer. She was a standard, a reminder that mastery was not about size or strength, but about control, focus, and an unyielding will to execute under pressure. The Admiral straightened, his expression unreadable. Yet within him, a thought had begun to take root. Clara Rhodes was not just passing a test. She was setting a precedent, one that would echo through the ranks long after this day was done. The range belonged to her now, and with each shot, she was rewriting what precision truly meant. The clang of the 3rd target crashing to the dirt still echoed faintly across the training grounds when silence reclaimed the air. It wasn't the uneasy silence of skepticism that had hung over the recruits before Clara fired her first shot. This was different, heavy, deliberate, and filled with the weight of realization. 3 rounds had been fired, and 3 steel plates had fallen. Each one had dropped without hesitation, struck with such precision that no doubt remained about the shooter's ability. Yet Clara Rhodes did not pause to bask in the awe of those behind her. She remained poised behind a massive rifle, her cheek pressed lightly against the stock, her breathing still measured. To her, this was not a performance, not an act to inspire astonishment or silence doubters. It was simply execution, the methodical fulfillment of training and focus. She did not see the recruits with their wide eyes and hushed whispers, nor the Admiral leaning intently forward, nor even Commander Reese shaking his head in disbelief. She saw only what mattered, the rifle in her hands and the targets ahead. Admiral Hayes studied her with a keen, discerning eye. He had seen plenty of recruits demonstrate skill in bursts. Luck carried some, arrogance drove others. But this was not luck nor arrogance. There was a rhythm to Clara's shooting, a deliberate calm that bordered on unnerving. She didn't rush her shots, yet neither did she waste time. Every movement, every adjustment, was purposeful, as though rehearsed countless times before. He shifted his weight slightly, his boots grinding against the gravel. To the Admiral, 3 down meant something far more important than numbers. In his experience, the first target tested nerve, the second tested stability, but the third tested consistency, the ability to replicate precision under growing pressure. Many shooters could strike once, maybe twice, but maintaining flawless execution shot after shot required a rare discipline. Clara had just cleared that invisible threshold. Among the recruits, the mood had shifted entirely. Where there had been smirks and whispers of doubt earlier, now there was only wide-eyed attention. Some of the younger officers leaned forward unconsciously, as though proximity might allow them to absorb whatever secret she possessed. A few crossed their arms tightly, visibly unsettled by the way their assumptions about her had been dismantled in less than a minute. One recruit, Ensign Torres, muttered under his breath, "No way she makes it 4." But even as he spoke, there was less conviction in his voice than before. His words were not confident predictions, but desperate clinging to skepticism in the face of evidence he could no longer ignore. Clara adjusted her position again, subtle and efficient. She slid her left elbow slightly forward, to accommodate the shift in angle for the fourth target. The sun had climbed higher, casting sharper shadows across the field, but her focus never wavered. She blinked once, clearing her vision through the scope, then let her breathing fall back into its familiar rhythm. To Clara, the rifle was no longer just a tool. It was an extension of her intent. She had long since learned that controlling the .50 caliber was not about overpowering it with brute strength, but about working with its natural rhythm, anticipating its recoil, aligning her body so that each blast was absorbed and redirected rather than resisted. Each shot was a dialogue between her and the weapon, and she had learned to listen. Her finger tightened slowly on the trigger, and the range braced itself. The blast erupted, deafening and forceful, a thunderclap that seemed to split the air. Dust leapt into the sunlight, and the unmistakable clang of steel echoed a heartbeat later. The fourth target dropped, toppling decisively into the dirt. The recruits erupted in a wave of gasps and murmurs. This was no fluke, no streak of beginner's luck. Clara was dismantling every doubt with the steady rhythm of her shots. 4 down, 2 to go, and her pace had not faltered. Admiral Hayes felt a rare surge of pride stir beneath his stern exterior. He did not smile. His face remained the stoic mask of command, but within him something shifted. Clara Rhodes was more than a promising officer. She was demonstrating a level of mastery that could not be ignored. She was rewriting expectations before his eyes. Commander Reese leaned closer, his voice low. "Sir, I've never seen anyone handle that weapon like this. Not even the gunnery sergeants." Hayes gave a short nod, his gaze still fixed on Clara. "Neither have I," he admitted quietly. "But watch her closely. This isn't just skill. It's discipline." On the line, Clara cycled the bolt with practiced efficiency, ejecting the spent casing. It tumbled into the gravel beside her, still hot, the metallic clink barely audible against the murmurs of the crowd. She didn't flinch. She didn't allow herself even the faintest reaction. Instead, she centered her scope on the fifth target, her breathing steady, her expression unchanged. For Clara, each target was not an end, but a step. She approached them as though walking a path, each shot carrying her closer to a destination she had envisioned long before stepping onto the range. She knew what was at stake, not only her qualification, but the perception of everyone watching. Yet she did not let that weight press upon her. She reduced the moment to its essence. Inhale, exhale, focus, fire. Behind her, the recruits watched in rapt silence. Even those who had once dismissed her were now riveted, unable to look away. In their silence lay an unspoken acknowledgement. She was not like the rest of them. She was operating at a level that demanded respect. The sun climbed higher, the shadows shortened, and the breeze carried the lingering scent of burnt powder across the field. But none of it mattered to Clara. The range, the recruits, even the Admiral, they were background noise. Only the target ahead mattered. Admiral Hayes felt the weight of the moment deepen. He had come to this test expecting to observe competence, perhaps even a spark of talent. What he was witnessing was something else entirely, something rare, something he could not yet name, but knew he would remember long after this day. Clara Rhodes had dropped 3 targets with flawless execution, and the 4th had just fallen in her wake. Now, with 2 remaining, the range belonged entirely to her. The recruits no longer questioned whether she could succeed. The only question left in their minds was how much further she could go. And as she drew her breath for the 5th shot, the silence on the range was no longer skepticism. It was reverence. The sound of the 4th target clattering to the dirt still reverberated faintly in the recruits' ears, but no one spoke. The silence that settled over the range now was not disbelief, nor was it doubt. It was awe, heavy and electric, as though each man and woman present recognized they were witnessing something extraordinary. Admiral Hayes kept his arms folded tightly across his chest, his expression stern, though his mind betrayed him. He was impressed, deeply so. He had seen dozens of shooters test themselves against the monstrous .50 caliber rifle, and most approached it with trepidation, fearing the weapon's recoil as much as they feared missing their mark. Yet Lieutenant Clara Rhodes displayed no such fear. She had fired 4 times, struck 4 targets, and absorbed the weapon's ferocious kick as though it were no more troublesome than a standard-issue service rifle. The Admiral's jaw tightened. He was determined not to reveal too much outwardly. Respect in his world had to be earned without theatrics. But inside, he recognized the significance of what was unfolding. Rhodes wasn't merely passing a test. She was dismantling the boundaries of expectation. The recruits, who earlier had doubted her strength or dismissed her quiet presence, now stood rooted in place, their gazes fixed on her. Some had clenched their fists unconsciously. Others bit their lips in silence. A few, particularly those who had ridiculed her before the test began, now found themselves staring with wide eyes, unable to reconcile the woman before them with the image they had carried in their minds. Clara adjusted her position slightly. The 5th target, smaller than the rest, sat at a greater distance, angled so that its edge gleamed under the relentless sunlight. It was designed to be difficult, a shot that demanded not just accuracy, but perfect control of breath, trigger squeeze, and follow-through. To Clara, difficulty was not an obstacle. It was a rhythm, another step in the sequence she had rehearsed endlessly. She inhaled slowly, filling her lungs until her chest expanded against the stock. Then she exhaled, each breath measured, her mind clearing like glass under sunlight. Through the scope, the world contracted once again. She saw only the steel plate, its faint shimmer taunting her across the expanse. Everything else, sunlight, heat, dust, even the presence of Admiral Hayes, dissolved into background silence. Commander Reese shifted uneasily beside the Admiral, glancing at the recruits before returning his gaze to Clara. "Sir," he whispered, "if she hits this one, I don't know what to call it anymore." Hayes didn't answer. His eyes narrowed, his focus locked on Clara. He had no intention of interrupting the moment. Clara's finger tightened against the trigger, slow and deliberate. She applied pressure with a surgeon's precision, neither rushing nor delaying, until the sear broke and the rifle roared once more. The shot thundered across the field, a violent crack that rattled the air and sent a fresh wave of dust spiraling into the sunlight. The recruits flinched instinctively, their ears ringing from the power of the blast. A half-second later, the 5th target collapsed, folding into the dirt with the same decisive finality as the rest. The silence that followed broke almost instantly into a low chorus of gasps and whispers. A few recruits exhaled audibly, as though they had been holding their breath with her. Others shook their heads, stunned. Clara had done the impossible again, and she had done it without a flicker of hesitation. Admiral Hayes's lips pressed into a thin line. His instincts told him that what he had just witnessed was not chance, not even raw talent, it was mastery, honed through relentless training and sharpened by an unyielding will. He recalled the long nights he had spent in his youth, laboring with weapons until his hands blistered, the countless hours of repetition required to reach even a semblance of consistency. And yet here was this lieutenant, dropping targets with such efficiency that it looked effortless. Reese broke the silence, his voice filled with disbelief. 5 for 5, sir. Not even the gunnery instructors do that cleanly. The Admiral gave him a curt glance. Discipline, he said firmly. That's what you're seeing. Discipline that doesn't falter under pressure. Clara, meanwhile, did not flinch, did not smile, did not seek approval. She cycled the bolt with smooth precision, ejecting the 5th spent casing. It clinked faintly against the gravel, rolling until it came to rest among the others scattered around her. Her eyes never left the sideline. Her focus had already shifted to the sixth and final target. The recruits fell quiet again, almost reverent now. Their skepticism had been burned away entirely, replaced by something heavier: respect. They knew the last target was the hardest of them all, deliberately placed at a punishing distance, angled in such a way that even minor miscalculations could send a round harmlessly past. Most shooters dreaded it. Clara seemed to welcome it. For her, the sixth shot was not a burden, but a culmination. She had walked each step of this path with care, and now only one remained. She inhaled deeply, letting the breath linger before releasing it. Her shoulders rose and fell with controlled rhythm. She adjusted her grip, nudging the stock tighter against her shoulder, aligning the crosshairs on the distant steel plate. Hayes leaned slightly forward, his boots crunching against the dirt. He could feel the tension radiating from the recruits around him, the way they collectively held their breath, waiting for the final strike. Clara's finger touched the trigger once more. The world around her fell silent. She began her slow, deliberate squeeze. The Admiral, for the first time in many years, felt his pulse quicken. The fifth casing still gleamed faintly in the gravel when Clara settled her cheek back against the rifle's stock. She did not glance at the fallen target. She did not acknowledge the recruits, whose hushed awe had swelled into something that bordered on reverence. The roar of the last shot was still fading from the air, but her mind had already advanced to the only thing that mattered: the sixth target. It stood farther out than the others, positioned at an unforgiving angle that challenged even the most seasoned marksman. Its steel face glared in the sunlight, half hidden in shadow from a jagged berm. Distance, glare, angle, the trifecta of difficulty. It was the kind of target meant to humble shooters who had gotten too comfortable, to remind them that mastery was never guaranteed. But Clara Rhodes did not see intimidation. She saw geometry. Distance, wind, light, and recoil were not adversaries. They were variables to be studied, accounted for, and overcome. Her mind broke them down with the cold precision of an engineer. The recruits shifted restlessly behind her. No one doubted her anymore, not after 5 perfect strikes, but the weight of this final target pressed on them all. They had witnessed her dismantle challenges, one after another. Yet something about this last test carried a gravity none could ignore. It was not merely the hardest shot of the day. It was the culmination, the shot that would define her performance in the eyes of Admiral Hayes. And Hayes knew it. The Admiral's boots ground softly against the dirt as he shifted forward, his eyes locked on Clara. He had watched countless shooters crumble under the pressure of a final shot. Even those who had breezed through earlier rounds often faltered here, their nerves betraying them when the moment demanded their utmost control. But as he studied Clara's posture, her unwavering calm, he sensed no crack in her composure. If anything, she seemed to grow steadier with each target destroyed. Commander Reese exhaled quietly beside him, shaking his head. 5 down already. Sir, if she makes the 6th? Hayes did not look at him. If she makes it, he replied, his tone flat, she won't just qualify. She'll redefine the standard. On the firing line, Clara made her final adjustments. She nudged her left elbow inward, settling deeper into the gravel, anchoring herself like a rooted tree. The butt of the rifle pressed snugly into her shoulder, the scope aligned with her eye in perfect symmetry. She inhaled slowly, filling her lungs with the hot, dry air of the range, then released it, letting her heartbeat slow into a steady rhythm. Through the scope, the world narrowed. The 6th target shimmered in the crosshairs, a distant rectangle of steel waiting to test her. She tracked it patiently, steadying her aim, aligning the reticle with its center. The crowd of recruits seemed to hold their collective breath. Even the smallest rustle of movement ceased. No one dared to cough or shuffle their boots. The only sound was the faint whistle of wind threading across the field and the steady rasp of Clara's breath as she prepared herself. Admiral Hayes felt something he had not in years. A flicker of suspense tightening in his chest. He had expected competence when he stepped onto the range this morning. He had hoped, perhaps, to see a spark of genuine talent. But what Clara was displaying went beyond hope. This was not talent alone. It was mastery forged through relentless repetition, sharpened by discipline, and carried by a will so steady bordered on unshakable. Clara's finger rested lightly against the trigger. She inhaled once more, then began the slow, deliberate squeeze that would send the final round downrange. The world seemed to pause. The rifle thundered. The recoil jolted into her shoulder, absorbed seamlessly by her stance. Dust erupted in a cloud around her, the shockwave rattling through the recruits standing behind. The sound rolled across the open expanse, echoing into the distance. Every eye turned instantly to the sixth target. For the briefest fraction of a second, it stood untouched, as though daring to defy her. Then it shuddered violently and collapsed, clanging into the dirt with a sound louder, sharper, and more decisive than all the others combined. The silence that followed was absolute. No one moved. No one spoke. Even the air itself seemed to hold its breath. Then, like a dam breaking, the recruits erupted in a wave of exclamations. Gasps, whispers, and incredulous laughter rippled through the crowd. Some clapped their hands together in stunned appreciation. Others shook their heads in disbelief. A few simply stared, wide-eyed, as though struggling to reconcile what they had just witnessed with their understanding of possibility. Clara lowered the rifle slowly, carefully, as though the act itself demanded the same discipline as the shots she had just fired. She rested the weapon gently on the stand, her hands lingering on the steel for a moment before withdrawing. Her face remained composed, her expression calm, betraying no trace of triumph or pride. Admiral Hayes, however, felt the weight of the moment sink deep into him. He had commanded men and women through combat, had seen extraordinary acts under fire, had borne witness to courage and precision alike. Yet what he had seen here today was something different, not born from chaos or desperation, but from discipline so refined it bordered on artistry. Commander Reese exhaled again, louder this time. 6 shots. 6 targets. Sir, that's perfection, Hayes interrupted quietly. His eyes never left Clara. The recruits, still buzzing with energy, began to murmur among themselves. They would carry this story into mess halls and barracks, retelling it again and again, each time with the same reverence. Clara Rhodes had taken on the .50 caliber rifle, the weapon that humbled so many, and had dropped 6 targets in succession with flawless precision. But Clara herself did not bask in their awe. She stepped back from the line, her movements controlled, her composure intact. She neither sought approval nor displayed arrogance. She simply carried herself as though this was what she had expected all along. Admiral Hayes recognized the truth in that posture. She hadn't come here to prove herself to others. She had come to execute, to demonstrate mastery over her craft. And in doing so, she had proven something far greater. He straightened slowly, his hands clasped behind his back once more. His voice, when he finally spoke, carried the weight of authority, tempered by genuine respect. "Lieutenant Rhodes," he said, his tone steady, "you have set a standard today that few, if any, will meet." Clara gave a crisp nod, her eyes steady, her demeanor unchanged. She did not need applause, nor did she crave recognition. Her performance spoke for itself. The recruits, still buzzing, fell into hushed murmurs again as they glanced at her. Some looked inspired, others chastened, but all understood they had witnessed something rare. The 6th casing lay among the others at her side, glinting faintly in the sunlight. 6 rounds fired, 6 targets destroyed, each shot an unbroken chain of discipline and precision. And though the exercise had ended, Admiral Hayes knew the impact of this moment was only beginning. The dust had hardly settled from the 6th target's fall when the murmurs of the recruits began to swell into a low, uncontainable hum. They stood scattered behind the firing line, shoulders tense, eyes wide, as if they had just witnessed a feat that bent the limits of possibility. For many of them, they had. 6 rounds, 6 targets. Not a single miss, not even a hint of doubt in her execution. Clara Rhodes had dismantled every expectation laid against her, not with bravado or spectacle, but with steady hands and unshakable composure. She stood now beside the massive .50 caliber rifle, her posture still crisp, her face calm. To her, it seemed, the performance was complete. Nothing more needed to be said. Yet for the recruits, it was only the beginning. Whispers ran through the ranks. Some, their voices tinged with embarrassment, recalled how they had doubted her earlier. Others spoke in hushed admiration, their words heavy with respect. Even those who remained silent carried a look in their eyes that betrayed their thoughts. They would remember this day long after they left the range. Admiral Hayes watched it all with a practiced eye. He had seen reputations rise and fall in moments, seen soldiers build or lose credibility with the squeeze of a trigger. But what Clara had achieved today was different. This was not a single stroke of luck or the fleeting spark of potential. This was discipline, precision, and mastery revealed in its purest form. Beside him, Commander Reese let out a long breath, running a hand across his jaw. "Sir," he muttered, "I've overseen more tests on this range than I can count. I've seen instructors themselves stumble on that 6th target. And she just..." His words trailed off, swallowed by the disbelief in his tone. Hayes did not respond immediately. His gaze remained fixed on Clara, studying the way she carried herself. She stood quietly, not basking in the attention, not demanding recognition. She waited, as if the test had been for her alone, and the outcome needed no validation. Finally, Hayes spoke, his voice low but edged with certainty. That wasn't just marksmanship. That was control. A mind and body aligned without hesitation. Reese turned his head slightly. "You think it's just training, sir?" Hayes narrowed his eyes. Training builds skill. Discipline turns skill into consistency. But what she displayed, he paused, the words forming carefully. That was something more. Intuition sharpened by repetition. The kind of instinct that can't be taught easily. The commander nodded slowly, his own expression dark with thought. The others saw it too. She's changed the room without saying a word. Indeed, the recruits no longer looked at Clara as they had that morning. Where there had been skepticism, there was now respect. Where there had been quiet derision, there was admiration. She had not argued for her place among them, nor defended her capability with words. She had let the rifle speak, and its voice had been final. Clara herself seemed untouched by the shift around her. She methodically gathered her gear, her motions precise, as if the exercise were any other routine drill. She brushed the dust from her hands, checked the chamber of the rifle one final time, and secured the weapon with the same care she had shown in firing it. Her movements carried no trace of fatigue, no sign of the pressure she had just endured. Hayes found himself considering what lay behind that composure. He had seen shooters tremble after their first hit, adrenaline coursing through their veins, their hands shaking with the weight of sudden success. Clara showed none of it. She was calm, grounded, as though success were her natural state. The Admiral stepped forward at last, the crunch of his boots drawing every eye toward him. The recruits fell silent instantly, their conversations cut short. Even the air seemed to tighten with expectation. He stopped a few feet from Clara, his hands clasped behind his back, his expression unreadable. For a long moment, he simply studied her. Then, in a voice measured and deliberate, he spoke. "Lieutenant Rhodes," he said, "today you demonstrated not just proficiency, but mastery. You have set a mark few can reach. More importantly, you have done so without hesitation, without error, and without doubt." Clara stood at attention, her eyes steady. "Yes, sir." Hayes let the silence linger. He wanted every recruit present to feel the weight of his words. This is not entertainment. This is not spectacle. What you witnessed here is what discipline looks like when it meets opportunity. Take note, because in the field, precision like this is not a luxury. It is survival. A murmur of acknowledgement rippled through the recruits. Some nodded subtly, others kept their gaze fixed on Clara, the message sinking deeper with each word. Reese glanced at the Admiral, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. Hayes, however, remained solemn. His mind was already moving beyond the range. In Clara Rhodes, he saw potential that extended far past marksmanship. Precision at this level was not limited to rifles. It reflected a mind capable of processing chaos and extracting clarity, of making the impossible appear inevitable. Those were qualities not just of a shooter, but of a leader. And Hayes knew leaders were forged in moments like this. The recruits began to disperse slowly, their conversations buzzing with renewed energy. Some clapped Clara lightly on the shoulder as they passed, gestures of respect offered without words. Others kept their distance, unwilling to intrude, but unable to hide their admiration. Clara accepted it all with quiet dignity, offering no more than a nod in return. She carried herself with the same calm she had before the first shot, as though nothing had changed. Yet Hayes knew everything had. As the range emptied, the Admiral lingered, his gaze still fixed on her. When the last of the recruits had gone, leaving only dust and silence in their wake, he finally spoke again. "Lieutenant," he said, his voice lower now, meant only for her, "you've proven yourself today. But precision with a rifle is only part of the fight. I want to see if that same control carries into other arenas." Clara met his eyes evenly. "Understood, sir." Hayes gave a single nod. "We'll see soon enough." With that, he turned and began the slow walk back across the range, Reese falling into step beside him. Clara remained where she stood, the weight of the .50 caliber rifle still resting in her hands. The sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the empty field. The fallen targets lay scattered in the dirt, silent witnesses to a performance that would be remembered. For the recruits, it had been a lesson. For the Admiral, it had been a revelation. For Clara Rhodes, it was simply another step forward. The range had emptied hours ago, but the echoes of Clara Rhodes' flawless 6 shots still lingered in every mind that had witnessed them. The story had already begun to spread through the base, like wildfire recruits whispering in the mess hall, instructors trading remarks in clipped tones, even seasoned gunners mentioning her name with a rare mix of respect and disbelief. Clara herself, however, moved through the aftermath with the same composure she had carried onto the line. To her, the day was not triumph, but routine. One task completed, another waiting. Admiral Hayes did not see it that way. Later that evening, as the sky burned with streaks of crimson from the setting sun, he sat in his office, hands folded over a thin dossier. The room was quiet, save for the ticking of a clock and the occasional hum of the air conditioning. The file before him was slim but precise, much like the lieutenant herself. Service record clean, evaluations consistently above average, fitness reports without flaw. Nothing in the paperwork shouted brilliance, yet Hayes knew better than to measure potential by ink on a page. What he had seen on that range told a different story, a story of control under pressure, of instincts honed beyond the ordinary. He had spent decades watching officers rise and fall, and in Clara, he recognized the faint outline of something rare. Not just a shooter, but perhaps something more. He tapped the dossier lightly, deep in thought. Then he closed it and stood, his decision forming. The following morning, Clara reported as usual, uniform crisp, movements precise. She expected nothing more than another day of drills and routine duties. Instead, she found Admiral Hayes waiting for her outside the training facility, his posture straight, his expression as unreadable as ever. "Lieutenant," he said without preamble, "walk with me." She fell into step beside him instantly, matching his pace as they crossed the base. The silence between them stretched, filled only by the distant hum of aircraft and the occasional bark of commands from drill sergeants. Clara did not speak. She had learned early in her career that silence often revealed more than hurried words. At last, Hayes stopped in front of a tactical simulation building. Its steel doors loomed tall, the faint glow of monitors spilling through the narrow windows. He turned to her. "You proved yesterday that your precision with a weapon is unmatched," he said evenly. "But in the Navy, precision is not confined to marksmanship. It must extend to decision-making, to leadership, to execution under circumstances far less controlled than a firing line." Clara nodded once, her expression steady. "Understood, sir." Hayes studied her for a moment, then gestured toward the doors. "Inside is a command simulation. It's designed to measure tactical thinking under pressure. Most officers struggle with it. I want to see how you handle it." Without hesitation, Clara replied, "Yes, sir." The simulation room was dimly lit, the glow of large digital screens casting long shadows across the floor. A network of consoles formed a semicircle, each one tied to a scenario that replicated real-world conditions. Radar feeds, communication logs, incoming threat assessments. Clara was directed to the command station at the center. Hayes and Reese stood off to the side, observing silently as the program came online. The scenario was brutal by design. A convoy under her protection had come under sudden attack from multiple fast-moving threats. Communications were patchy, intelligence incomplete, and the clock ticking relentlessly. Every decision carried consequence: commit resources here and risk vulnerability there, move too slowly and lose ships, move too quickly and spring an ambush. Most officers, when faced with the simulation, floundered. They hesitated, second-guessed themselves, or overcommitted resources. But Clara approached it as she had the rifle, with clarity, calm, and unshakable focus. Her eyes scanned the data streams, picking out patterns others might miss. She issued orders to her virtual subordinates with precision, not rushing, not hesitating. She anticipated the enemy's movements before they unfolded, repositioned assets with calculated efficiency, and maintained composure even as the scenario escalated in complexity. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. The tension in the room thickened as the simulation pressed harder, throwing unexpected variables into play. But Clara adapted seamlessly. When one flank appeared to collapse, she shifted strategy and reinforced it without panic. When a decoy attempt tried to lure her forces off course, she read the trap instantly and avoided it. Hayes watched closely, his arms folded behind his back. He saw in her the same qualities he had glimpsed on the range: discipline, control, and an uncanny ability to filter chaos into clarity. At last, the simulation ended. The screens froze, the data streams halted, and a final report appeared. Mission success. Minimal losses. Enemy neutralized. Clara sat still for a moment, breathing evenly, her expression calm. Then she rose to her feet and stood at attention. Hayes regarded her in silence before speaking. "You didn't hesitate," he said. "No, sir," she replied. "You anticipated," he continued. "Yes, sir." Reese stepped forward, shaking his head slightly in disbelief. "Admiral, I've never seen anyone finish that simulation with numbers that clean. Most struggled to keep half the convoy intact. She kept them moving like clockwork. Hayes nodded slowly, his gaze never leaving Clara. It's the same discipline, the same clarity she showed with the rifle. Only this time, it wasn't bullets, it was decisions. Clara remained silent, neither humbled nor boastful. She simply waited. Finally, Hayes stepped closer. His voice dropped, carrying weight meant only for her. Lieutenant, what I saw today confirms something I suspected. You don't just execute, you see. You see the whole field, the angles, the risks. That's not common. That's rare. Clara met his gaze evenly. Thank you, sir. But Hayes wasn't offering compliments. He was measuring her, testing how far she could be pushed. He knew that in war, the rare ones were often those who carried the heaviest burdens. And Clara Rhodes, whether she realized it or not, was walking toward those burdens with steady steps. Outside, the sun had climbed high, casting sharp light across the base. Clara left the simulation building with her usual composure, her expression giving nothing away. Yet inside, she understood what had happened. The test on the range had been about precision. The test in the simulation had been about judgment. And both, she knew, had only been the beginning. Admiral Hayes watched her go, hands clasped behind his back. Reese glanced at him, curiosity written plain across his features. Sir, Reese asked quietly, what are you going to do with her? Hayes did not answer immediately. His eyes followed Clara's figure as she walked across the open expanse, her stride purposeful, her shoulders straight. Finally, he spoke, his tone thoughtful but resolute. What I always do with potential, he said. I test it. And if it holds, I sharpen it. The call came before dawn. A coded message, brief and direct. Lieutenant Rhodes, report to Hangar 12 immediately. Clara moved without hesitation, pulling on her uniform, boots laced tight, hair bound neatly. The sky outside was still dark, the first streaks of light not yet breaking the horizon. The base felt different at this hour, quieter, sharper, as though the day itself was holding its breath. Hangar 12 loomed ahead, its doors half open, the glow of fluorescent lights spilling across the tarmac. Inside, Admiral Hayes stood with Commander Reese, their faces illuminated by the glow of a tactical display. A small team of sailors clustered around, checking gear, prepping equipment, their movements brisk but silent. Hayes turned as Clara entered. His expression carried no warmth, only purpose. Lieutenant, he said, voice steady, today is not a drill. You've proven your skill on the range. You've proven your clarity in simulation. Now I need to see how you perform when the consequences are real. Clara nodded once. Understood, sir. Reese tapped the display. A series of red markers pulsed on a digital map of the nearby coastline. Intelligence picked up suspicious activity, here unmarked vessels, moving into restricted waters under cover of darkness. Fast, evasive, no identification. Could be smugglers, could be reconnaissance. We can't assume harmless. Hayes clasped his hands behind his back. Your task, Lieutenant, is to lead this response team. Intercept the vessels, assess, and neutralize if necessary. Minimal force, maximum control. No errors. There was no hesitation in Clara's reply. Yes, sir. The rigid hum of the patrol boat cut through the pre-dawn air as Clara stood at the bow, eyes scanning the horizon. The sea stretched dark and endless, broken only by the faint outlines of waves glinting under a thin sliver of moonlight. Behind her, the team waited, their trust uncertain, but their obedience absolute. For many, this was the true test. On the range, Clara had impressed them. In simulation, she had stunned them. But here, in the unpredictable expanse of open water, There were no reset buttons, no safe boundaries. Here, decisions carried weight. Lives depended on judgment. Clara's gaze locked on the distant blips moving across the radar screen. 3 vessels, small and fast, weaving deliberately to obscure their course. She noted their speed, their spacing, the way they moved as though probing for weakness. She steadied her breathing, the same rhythm she carried into every challenge. Maintain current speed, she ordered calmly. Do not pursue yet. Let them commit first. The helmsman adjusted course, eyes flicking to her, surprised by her composure. Minutes stretched into tense silence. The enemy vessels drew closer, weaving erratically, testing the perimeter. Then suddenly, one darted forward, closing the distance in a sharp burst of speed. Clara's voice cut through the air, calm but decisive. Hold course. Starboard gunners, track only. Do not fire. The sailors obeyed, weapons locking on to the approaching vessel. The recruits who had once doubted her now found themselves clinging to her voice, her clarity their anchor against uncertainty. The lead vessel veered suddenly, skimming dangerously close, its wake spraying across the patrol boat's bow. The crew tensed, fingers itching on triggers, but Clara raised her hand sharply. Hold, not yet. Her eyes narrowed, scanning the vessel. No visible armament. No hostile fire. Reckless maneuvering, but not yet aggression. She waited, her mind weighing each variable, as precise as if she were aligning a rifle scope. Then the second vessel accelerated, circling wide, attempting to flank. Clara's voice came again, firm and exact. Helm, adjust 20 degrees port. Gunners, track second target. Prepare warning shot, starboard side only. The boat shifted smoothly under her command. The second vessel's attempt to flank was cut off, its advantage lost. Clara gave a single nod. Fire warning. A burst from the heavy gun split the air, water erupting in a spray just meters from the vessel's bow. The enemy boat jolted to a halt, its reckless confidence shattered. Clara didn't flinch. Broadcast. Restricted waters. Identify or retreat. The radio crackled as the message carried across the waves. Silence answered, broken only by the sound of engines idling. The third vessel, still at a distance, slowed abruptly. Clara read the pattern instantly. These were not fighters. They were probing, testing defenses, perhaps smugglers gauging response time. Dangerous, but not determined to engage. Helm, she said calmly, maintain position. Weapons hold. Continue broadcast. One by one, the vessels retreated, engines roaring as they sped back toward the horizon. The sea grew still again, leaving only the faint churn of their wake, dissolving into silence. The team exhaled almost as one. Some exchanged incredulous looks. Others stared at Clara as though seeing her for the first time. No panic, no wasted shots. No unnecessary escalation. She had read the encounter with the same clarity she had read the targets on the range. She turned from the bow, her expression unchanged. Report complete, she said. Back at the base, dawn broke fully as the patrol boat docked. Admiral Hayes stood waiting on the pier, his hands clasped behind his back, his expression unreadable. He had monitored the entire encounter remotely, every order Clara had given, every decision she had made. As she stepped off the boat, she came to attention before him. Her uniform was damp with sea spray, her face calm as ever. Lieutenant Rhodes, Hayes said, his voice carrying across the pier, you demonstrated judgment under pressure. You kept your team steady, prevented escalation, and achieved resolution without firing a shot beyond a warning. That is discipline. That is command? Clara nodded once. Yes, sir. Reese, standing just behind the Admiral, shook his head slightly, still in disbelief. Sir, most officers would have panicked out there. She She read it like a book. Hayes gave no outward reaction, but inside he felt the certainty settle. Clara Rhodes was not just a marksman. She was not just a strategist. She was something far more valuable, a leader who carried clarity into chaos, who could command not just with skill, but with calm certainty. He stepped closer, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "Lieutenant, from this day forward, you are under my direct observation. I don't know yet how far you can go, but I intend to find out. You've earned that much." Clara met his gaze evenly. "Understood, sir." Hayes held her stare for a moment longer, then nodded. The decision was made. She was no longer just another officer. She was a name he would remember, a potential he would cultivate. As the sun rose higher, casting its light across the base, Clara Rhodes turned and walked back toward her unit, her stride steady, her shoulders squared. The recruits who had once doubted her now stepped aside instinctively, respect etched across their faces. Behind her, Admiral Hayes watched in silence, his thoughts unspoken but clear. On the range, she had shattered doubt. In simulation, she had proven vision. On the water, she had shown command. And somewhere deep inside, he knew this was only the beginning.